of a discussion for anyone who wants to post any questions or any comments into the feedback that we've got there. But what I'm also going to do is launch a poll. This poll has 10 questions. It would be really useful to have people's feedback. So I have just posted it now. So it gives us feedback about the conference itself, whether you enjoyed it, whether there are things that you would like us to do more of, etc. But again, really highlighting that this is very much a collaborative effort. While the conference is seen as being the 50th anniversary of the collection, the Wellcome Collection, coming to Swansea, seemingly on the 17th of September 1971, it was very much a case of bringing together all of these different people who were involved in museums, from the Wellcome Collection as well, in order to better understand our material. And I think really the dispersal of the collection in 1971 perhaps happened so quickly that a lot of these museums didn't have the opportunity to really research what they received. Swansea, to some extent, was a little bit different in that the Wellcome Collection was really the foundation of this new museum in Swansea. Without the Wellcome loan, we wouldn't have that museum. The other institutions, so whether it be Liverpool, Manchester, Durham, UCL, Petrie, they all had their collections already there. So perhaps the Wellcome stuff was being neglected. And I hope by this conference, it will really ignite the interest in the collection of Henry Wellcome and roughly 20,000 Egyptian objects, if not much more than that. Where do we go from here? Do we have further events relating to the Wellcome material? I've spoken to colleagues from Wellcome, and perhaps Alexander even wants to chip in on this. Do we make this a regular event, or do the Wellcome Collection make this a regular event, perhaps an annual one, but looking from different perspectives? This one is focusing on Egypt. Perhaps in subsequent years, it can focus on the medical objects, or the Peruvian objects, or the objects from the Near East, etc. I think there's a lot more scope. When you talk about, I think Ruth had in her talk, over 80 institutions who received Wellcome material. That's all been dispersed, and it's nice to bring it back together again. And I see Alexandra's turned on her camera, so I'll turn over to you for a bit of a discussion.
Oh, I'm not sure there's a discussion. I think we would love to see a kind of series of conference events like this. And I've been amazed at how well it's worked over the course of 3 days as well. I think there were a lot of people who perhaps signed up expecting to go to 1 or 2 talks and were hooked and have been here for all 3 days. So hopefully your poll will show that. Yeah, I'm definitely very keen to talk to you, but also to other museum partners with material of very different kinds around future conference options. I am interested in talking to people here today in terms of Egyptological recipient museums to see if we can work together on the back of this conference. And I spoke to Emily this morning and said, do you think we could run a transcribathon later this autumn? And she said yes. So hopefully we'll be able to do that too.
And I'm just looking down at we had the question on the transcribathon, and quite a few people are interested in it, or possibly interested in it, but very few people not interested in it. So I think there's definitely, that's the result so far. I think there's definitely an interest in doing the transcribathon. So
I'm sure we can pull something together.
I see,
the first one was a lot of work, but I hope now we've got everything organized, we should be able to run lots more. That'd be great.
And I think certainly with the Transcribe Wellcome project, it's just phenomenal in terms of what it can do for all of us for understanding our collections and tracing them back even further. There's hidden gems really in the archives at the Wellcome Collection, which I've been using over the last few years, and I've been posting into the chat. So much potential, I think, with the material there, and especially as we move into the digital age, the potential of what could be done.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in my talk as well, I'd really like to look at digitizing some of the material that isn't at Wellcome. I don't quite know how we go about that. We need some money from somewhere to do so, but it does all fit together into this coherent whole, and we're learning such a lot from the transcription work by working with other people and other museums who know the objects much more than we do. It would be brilliant to digitize the rest of the documentation. Need to find out where it all is first.
That's true. I don't know if, since you're mentioning that, if you want to also mention perhaps about the digitization of the auction catalogues that the Wellcome are doing.
Yeah, as people who have been using the archive to research provenance of objects will know that the archive can be really frustrating, because you do often come to a kind of grinding halt at an auction sale. But Wellcome does have quite, it's actually a reasonably complete series of marked up sales catalogues from the auctions from which Wellcome purchase material, and they were not initially digitized as part in 2017 as part of the main archive, because they weren't fully catalogued at that point. They now are, and they're being digitized probably, it's 5:02, so they may have, on a Friday, so they may have finished exactly as I speak, but they are going through digitization at the moment. They're starting to appear online. They're being digitized in partnership with the Internet Archive, but they should also appear in the main archive fairly shortly, but there are thousands of them, so it is taking a little bit of time to get them through.
And I've seen, certainly from the link that you posted to me previously, that a lot of the Stevens catalogues have now been appearing online, which is really something that is extremely difficult to get hold of. So just last week or 2 weeks ago, I was going through one from 1920, in which we have a mummified baby in our collection. And it's one of the most, I would say, frequently requested objects by students and visitors to see when we go to the museum store. And so I was able to find that in the auction catalogue, and it turns out that it's not an Egyptian mummy, but Peruvian. So that is something that we really didn't know anything about. And I said to Carolyn and Wendy that we really need to look into, I don't know what the policy is in terms of Peruvian mummies and repatriation of them compared to, of course, Egyptian mummies. So something else for us to consider.
Maybe something you want to talk to our colleagues at the Science Museum about, because I know they've had some similar issues. And just to say with Stevens as well, specifically, we asked for that to go through digitization first, because as those of you who heard my talk and saw the slide where there was a pie chart showing the auction, well, all the sources of the Wellcome material, but Stevens is a big part of that pie chart. Wellcome bought so heavily from Stevens that we specifically asked for those to be digitized first. And some of them are there now and some of them aren't. That's always the one I want is not quite online yet, but I'm sure it will be in the next few months.
I don't know whether it's possible to post a link to them online.
Yep.
Are they public now as well?
Yes, they're just, I mean, it's on the Internet Archive site. They're just slightly difficult to navigate because they're not in the kind of context of the archive catalogue, but I don't see why I can't post the link in the chat.
I see Jasmine has made a comment into the chat, just more of a comment than a question, that she would like to see more connections established between Australian museums with Egyptian collections, especially small collections of Western Australian Museum and South Australian Museum, and projects like the Wellcome one. There's still much research to be done, absolutely, on the sources of material in Australia, especially the smaller collections that are under-researched and lack research funding. And on a slightly related note, I don't know if you know Alexandra or Ruth, if there were institutions in Australia who received Wellcome objects.
Yes. I don't think Ruth can talk, can she? She's not in Asia.
I will put Ruth on if Ruth is happy to.
If you give me 2 seconds, I will look up exactly where in Australia.
So I've just promoted Ruth to a panelist. So if you're happy, Ruth, to unmute yourself and turn your camera on, you can perhaps comment on that.
Hello, sorry, I'm going to see if my internet connection holds up at this time in the evening when all the people are going on Netflix around my neighbourhood. So yes, there definitely are museums in Australia that receive material, which I think was the question that I heard.
It's not very many, actually. It's quite small, Ruth.
Yeah,
well,
I was going to say, if you've probably got it up, I'm struggling to get
the University of Melbourne received an entire shop fitting, which actually came from a pharmacy in London, which was shipped in its entirety in 1976. And some of the lackish finds went to Sydney. Actually, that surprises me that there are so few museums in Australia. Certainly some material went to New Zealand, but apparently not so much in Australia.
Yeah,
but certainly the welcome material does end up in the strangest of places, and I see Isabel in the chat suggesting that there may even be stuff in Alaska. So I don't know if anybody has any other comments or would like the opportunity to say anything. If you do, please raise your hand or post into the chat and we can promote you to a panelist to say so. We've still got about 8 minutes or so left, but I think it's been a very successful event so far. We're really grateful for everyone who has attended the event, and of course very grateful to the Wellcome Collection and for our transcribers who have done a fantastic job over the last few days. And thanks to everyone who has completed the poll. It is still open. There's still the opportunity to complete the poll if you haven't already done so, and that feedback will be really useful to us. And I see Abir has said she's going to be spending a lot of time looking in the Wellcome archives. I really recommend it. Some of the correspondence that you'll find in there, so let me open a folder that I have. You've got correspondence relating to the Amherst collection, the Blackman collection, Miroway, the Ashmolean Museum, the Burns, the Blackman collection, obviously the different museums, Bolton, the British School of Archaeology in Egypt, Guy Brunton. There's correspondence, quite interesting, between Wellcome and Budge, Caton Thompson, David Dixon archives as well in there, Durham Museum, the Egypt Exploration Society, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, letters back and forth between mainly Johnson Saint and various people in the Cairo Museum. Just a phenomenal amount of documentation there that is extremely useful for the history of Egyptology, all available for free to access via the Wellcome website, and I know that the link has been posted several times into the chat, so do have a look at that.
Thank you for the plug, Ken. Actually, something I wanted to try and get into my talk and sort of ran out of space was the point that the material we're transcribing is just the kind of fundamental part of the object documentation system. And I think one of the best ways of using it actually is to find a name of a collector or an institution on a flimsy slip, and then look for that name within the archive as a whole. And you can do that by searching our catalogue if you put in whatever you want to search for, and then the collection reference for the archive, which is WA/HMM. And that will narrow your search just to that archive. It's a much richer archive than it appears from just all those hundreds of thousands of flimsy slips, but they're often the way into the story.
Yeah, I think it's quite fascinating learning about the collectors who initially owned these objects. So a lot of the classical ones that I showed you upstairs, the Egypt and its neighbours, come from the collection of Sir Herman Weber, who wasn't an Egyptologist at all. I think he was a heart surgeon, from what I remember correctly. He's quite well known. If you search Sir Herman Webber, you'll be able to find details on Google about him. And just learning a little bit about who these people were that collected the objects, and probably thinking, why did they collect them? What do they do with them? And so on.
And increasingly, I'm thinking doing that research across Wellcome's museum and the library. The museum has been sort of considered in its own kind of silo, I think, a lot in the past. And Emily, who I know has had to go home this evening already, so she's not here, but she was saying yesterday she was frantically scribbling notes about I think it was the Manchester talk about TJ Pettigrew, who was already on Emily's research list because Wellcome bought Pettigrew's library and a collection of prints. So that name had come up a lot in our inventory at Wellcome, and she was hoping to research him. She had no idea he also unwrapped mummies. So it's some fascinating connections that are being made across Wellcome's collecting.
And I see Abir has asked about whether it's possible to get in touch with the Egypt Centre volunteers regarding help with shorthand. Abir, if you send me an email, absolutely. We're certainly looking for people to help. You've got my email address anyway. So again, if anyone is interested in collaborating with us or with colleagues at the Wellcome, I'm sure Alexander, you'd be happy to have more transcribers.
Yeah, and particularly anyone who can read shorthand. I'd love to do a kind of mini project transcribing those notebooks that I know you're obsessed with, Ken. We have a load of shorthand notebooks that replace. There are some gaps in the index card series we have, and we have some shorthand notebooks that fill in some of those gaps. I can't read them. They, I think, are in 1920s Pitman shorthand. So if anyone can read that, I'd love to hear from you.
I did put a call out during one of my talks for a class that I was doing, whether anyone could read shorthand, and I had a couple of people who said that they could. So I think this is certainly something, if we advertise it, we could probably get people who could read these. And certainly I had a few people try out some of the shorthand and give it a go. And they comparing it to the slips when you had them, it was pretty accurate. But there's a lot of them. So you'd need a pretty big team, I think.
I put this comment into the chat, but I just thought it was really worth reflecting on the fact that the openness of museums at this conference to talk about the realities of collections documentation that are messy, that there are parts of collections that need continuous work, I think is really valuable. And, you know, like predecessors before us, museum professionals, library professionals, information professionals are getting to grips with these layers that get lost, rediscovered, reconnected, dispersed in many ways. And that's been really exciting for me, and really lets us unlock new ways of cutting through and into this material through this collaboration and willingness to share these kind of messy realities. So yeah, just a good reflection on that point from me.
And there was a question as well in the chat there by Jasmine, asking if there was anything in the Wellcome collection that had been associated with Amelia Edwards. I haven't seen a file for Amelia Edwards or anything related to her, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was. I just haven't looked. That's someone who I will have to have a look and see. I don't know whether you know Ruth or Alexandra. No. So it's just coming up to 1:15 now, and I know people need to get off, and we have celebratory drinks afterwards as well, so we're going to get off. But thank you to everybody who has been attending this event and for really celebrating with us, marking 50 years since the Wellcome collection arrived in Swansea in 90 plus crates of 4,500 roughly objects, and a similar situation happening with the other museums in Durham, Liverpool, Birmingham, who unfortunately we didn't have represented in this conference, and of course UCL, not to mention the other museums who received material such as Cambridge and the Science Museum, of course, and elsewhere. So we really hope that people did enjoy this conference. And again, it really shows what can be done with collaboration. And we do hope that we'll be able to take this forward and make it a more regular thing, either with workshops, smaller workshops, or perhaps larger conferences, such as what we've done today. So thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to all our chairs. Thank you to our moderators, especially to Sam in the chat. Thank you, of course, to the audience, and of course to our transcribers. It really has been a fantastic event. I don't think it couldn't have gone much better than what it had. And today was quite frantic for me, certainly running around between different places, but it all seemed to work okay. So thank you again to everybody.
And thank you to you, Ken.
Thank you.